Anyway, I'm Mellody, and I'm here to speak to you tonight on love addiction. The first thing I want to say about this is I am a love addict, and what I have to say to you tonight is really comes straight out of my recovery. There's a lot said about sex addiction, but not a whole lot, I don't think, definitively has been said about love addiction, so I want to say some things about it. Because I'll tell you, this thing called love addiction is to me, and I'm an addict in many different ways, was the worst thing I ever tried to recover from, and I probably fight that addiction more than any other addiction I've got, and it about killed me to do it. I'm going to explain to you why that is today, and probably the majority of you are going to find out you've got this too. But there's a good message to this. Now, before I do that, let me just say a little something about what sets this addiction up and what sets addictions up, any addiction. There is a disease called codependency, which I've been speaking about for many years. And I say it's a disease. It's really, I don't even consider it a disease. I say it's a state of dis-ease caused by child abuse that renders a person unable to experience appropriate levels of self-esteem, set functional boundaries with other people, own their own reality politically, and your reality is made up of what you look like, or your body, your thinking, your feelings, which come out of what you think, and your behavior, what you do or don't do. That's your reality. Difficulty taking care of your dependency issues around needing and wanting, and difficulty expressing your reality moderately. What happens is when kids are born in a family system that's less than nurturing, their physical body grows up, but inside they don't develop the mechanisms that make a person an adult. Now, none of us know this. We grow up and have these big bodies, and we walk around acting like we know what we're doing. Some of us who can be real good and perfect and defended behind walls and think that we're better than can really look good and delude ourselves about how wonderful we are. But anyway, a disease called codependency sets up love addiction, and I believe codependency sets up all addictions. That's because it's very, very stressful to be a little person inside a great big body, isn't it? Fooling everybody all the time, but inside knowing on some level you're not fooling yourself. And what happens to people is that they get into addictions to relieve the stress of being a codependent. Being in an adult body dominated by a needy, pain-filled, fear-filled, anger-filled, and shame or power-filled child creates stress. Right? Y'all know that. I can tell you're laughing. The stress needs to be blocked. Any addiction will do that. Love addiction just happens to be one of them that does it very well. But it's kind of a hidden addiction, because love addiction is standard in this culture, especially for women. So it is so prevalent that it's hard to recognize love addiction as not normal behavior, but it isn't. There is a specific kind of abuse, I think, sets up love addiction. The kind of child abuse, I believe, that sets up love addiction is neglect and or abandonment of the child by the major caregiver. Now, what happens to children that are being raised in a family that's less than nurturing and who does neglect the child's needs and wants, or abandons the child in terms of their needing and wanting and everything else a child needs, what happens to that child is that they do not feel loved. Loving is about holding somebody in warm personal regard. Any kid's going to know when somebody's neglecting them, not giving them time, attention, and direction, physical nurturing, attending to all their other needs. Any kid's going to know that they aren't loved, because if they were loved, they'd be getting those things they're not getting. Warm personal regard is about loving somebody, holding them in warm personal regard, and taking care of a child's needs and wants makes the child feel loved. When they live in a family where they do not feel loved, do you think that's stressful? Yeah. Now, what I've noticed with people that are these board-certified love addicts is that they got a little bit. They got a little bit of love from their major caregivers that relieved the stress of not being loved or not being well cared for. And their brain never forgot it. They began to realize that if they could just get that warm personal regard or unconditional regard from somebody, it would relieve the stress of not being loved. So their brain took that in. And what I found in listening to histories of love addicts over the last about 18 months is that they made a decision as a little person that when they got big enough so that they could be in relationships with others, they would find somebody who would finally make them feel loved, cared about. And that would solve the problem of not feeling loved, which sets up love addiction. Now, love addiction is a state whereby a person assigns too much time, attention, and value above himself or herself to any person he or she is in a relationship with, coupled with unrealistic expectations for unconditional positive regard, and to the exclusion of his or her own self-care and self-valuing. Now, I need to go over that so you know what I'm talking about. What happens to people is when they finally get into a relationship with another person, they make that person too important to them. They literally make that person their higher power. That's called assigning that person too much time, attention, and value above yourself. That means the person you're in a relationship with, that you're addicted to, is your higher power. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody in a relationship with somebody who is their higher power? How comfortable are you in that relationship? Don't you want to kill them one minute and worship them the next minute? It's terrible. Assigning somebody too much time, attention, and value above yourself, coupled with unrealistic expectations for unconditional positive regard. You know what that means? That means you think that this person's going to give you unconditional positive regard, and that is your right because you're in a relationship with them. Now that's absurd, irrational, immoderate, immature thinking. I want to tell you something. The bad news with this addiction is that it's nobody's business ever to do that for you. Guess whose business it is, though? Yours. You are the only... Once it's not been done by your major caregivers, the only person that can ever do that for you is you. And to expect unconditional positive regard from somebody you're in a relationship with is not rational thinking. The only person that can do that for you is you. And you can love you, except if you're an untreated codependent. See, you almost have to get into codependency recovery before you know you have this addiction. In fact, I think in order to recover from it, you have to have sufficient codependency recovery before you can even begin doing it. Because what is it going to mean to be in recovery from being a love addict? It means you got to learn how to take care of you. And I want to tell you something. If you haven't recovered from codependency, you can't take care of you. So in order to solve this problem, you've got to get in recovery from your codependency first, and then do what you have to do to get out of these love-addicted relationships. In addition to that, the love addict not only puts somebody on the throne and then expects unconditional positive regard from them, the other thing they do is they start neglecting their own issues of self-care and self-nurturing. I don't know how many very high-powered women I've known over the last few years that do very, very well as long as they're single, but get them in a relationship with one man, and in about 3 months they're sicker than a dog. It's like once they get connected to that person, either through dating or sex or marriage, I wouldn't have had to say that 15, 20 years ago. Things are different than when I grew up. But anyway, what happens is as soon as they get into a relationship with someone, they throw all their issues of self-care and self-nurturing right out the window and start hanging and whining on these people. And they get sicker and sicker and sicker and do less to take care of themselves. And being one of those people, I'll tell you, I know what I'm talking about. I remember before I understood that I was an addict, in terms of being a love addict, I thought there was something weird with me because I knew I could take care of myself very well and felt wonderful as long as I didn't have a man in my life. And I thought it was their problem, not me. I was this wonderful person. And what happened was I just kept picking these nerds. I want to tell you, it was a terrible day when I discovered I was the problem. And that was only 9 months ago, so I'm fairly early. I got to say, I don't have a whole lot of sobriety in this. And I'll tell you what my friend Janet in California, who's my love addiction sponsor, told me, but I'll get into that later. I thought she was absolutely crazy, but I'll tell you about it. Now let me show you something, trying to speak and write at the same time. I'm getting so old and I'm on some heart medication that makes it impossible. I can no longer write and speak at the same time. Anyway, let me tell you some other bad news before I tell you how funny it can be. Guess what we know about how people pick people to be in a relationship with? We know you will pick somebody just like your major caregivers. In fact, usually it's a combination of your parents' worst traits that you get attracted to. I think it was Fritz Perls who first, actually it was his wife. Actually his wife probably did more about that work than anybody knows, but let's not go into that. I read an article she wrote one time. Boy, she singed his hair back with that one. He had another addiction nobody knew about, but if you want to know what a drift is, he established Esalen. That'll give you an idea what kind of addict he was. But anyway, we found out that people choose to be in relationships with others more on an unconscious basis more than any other way. And the unconscious attraction is about the worst traits your parents had. I think we get attracted to that on an unconscious level so that we can resolve these old issues. So we can resolve the old issues. But we don't know that. You know why? We don't know that at all, because when we start dating, guess what we do? Oh, my husband left. Good. I can really tell you how it is now that he's gone. But anyway, where was I? Yeah, we get attracted to people that have our parents' worst traits so that we can work out the issues. Now, when you think about a love addict having parents that really neglected them or abandoned them, guess who you're going to pick to be in a relationship with your love addict? Yes, you're going to pick somebody who's not there for you. Anybody who's not there for you, you will pick, because you find them attractive as they're walking away from you. I never was attracted to anybody that was facing me saying, "You're wonderful." I looked at them and I said, if you say I'm wonderful, you got to be a sick person. So I was never attracted to those people that were busy being nice. I only got attracted to those backs walking away. And then I'd go into high gear about getting them to turn around and look at me. And they did occasionally, because I created quite a ruckus. Anyway, what happens to love addicts is they're attracted to addicts, and any addict will do, because they're about walking away, right? Because who are they? Who's their higher power? Let me tell you, not you. Who is their higher power? Work, a bottle, another woman, another man, if they're a sex addict. It could be around their eating disorder. It could be around any addiction will do. But one of the sicker things in this whole thing is that most love addicts are in particular attracted to sex addicts, because that's what brings you the most intensity. And that's the bad news. But anyway, what happens with love addicts is they're attracted to people walking away from them, which is just any addict. If you check into these relationships, you'll find who they are chasing after is an addict because of the person's walking away from them. Now, the love addict's greatest fear is fear of abandonment. The addict's greatest fear is fear of engulfment. Now, isn't that a combination? What is engulfment about anyway? Engulfment is about this addict's fear that somebody's going to control their reality. Somebody's going to tell them what they should look like, what they should think, what they should feel, and what they should do or don't do. Now, what does the love addict need to do? Tell them all that. Now, that's a perfect experience to set up what I call an addicted relationship. And addictive relationships are relationships that mistake intensity for romance and love. Let me tell you something. You got somebody fearing abandonment, chasing somebody that fears engulfment. The one thing that's going to come out of that is intensity. Oh, I know what I was going to tell you before I saw Pat leave. Now he's coming back. Now I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry, Walt, you wanted to tape this. Oh, doggone it, it was really good. What was it I wanted to tell you? Fiddle, I can't remember. I'll just blurt it out if it comes up again. Anyway, what happens is that the love addict fears abandonment, and the addict is about going off into their addictions in order to avoid intimacy because they find intimacy overwhelming. What happens then is as the addict starts walking away from the love addict, is the love addict starts taking out after them, chasing them, which causes the addict to run faster. Now, as the love addict is noticing the addict going out in the wild blue yonder like that, they go into withdrawal because the addict's not in their life right now. Now, the withdrawal for the love addict is called fear to the point of panic and pain to the point of wanting to kill yourself. Anybody familiar with that? That's the withdrawal. You know, just like booze gives you withdrawal, like you got the flu. Withdrawal for the love addict is experienced as intense panic and intense pain to the point you want to kill yourself. So that spurs you on. Now, after a while, you will find it so unpleasant trying to get this person to be in your life that you give up, turn around, and start walking in the other direction. Away from them, because the pain just isn't worth it. You cannot stay wanting to kill yourself for very long, nor can you stay in that level of panic that happens for a chronic love addict. So you finally give up. You stop and you say, hey, this isn't worth it. You turn around, start walking away, and guess what happens? They see you walking away. It's like they're charging like this, and you stop way back there. And they realize there's not that thundering herd coming after them. They turn around and they see you're walking away. Now that triggers their fear of abandonment, because under their fear of engulfment is fear of abandonment. See how sick we all are? A friend of mine came up right before the saying, Peter, are you going to talk about extreme strength and hope or just the disease? I said, well, I'll try to talk about recovery later on. But anyway, so then the addict sees the love addict walking away and they charge. And if they're a sex addict, guess what they do? They turn on the charm. Anybody had that charm turned on you? It's powerful. Just real powerful. And they turn on that charm. And what happens then is the love addict gets seduced by all that charm. And so you turn around and you say, ah! And there's about 10 seconds of relief for both of you when you start charging after them and they start running again. I call it the do-do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do-do. You know, up and down like on a piano board. But it creates intensity, doesn't it? And we call that romance in this culture, and we're sick to call it romance. It's not about romance or love at all. It's about addiction. Now, every time the love addict experiences the addict running away, they go into withdrawal. And this withdrawal, as I said before, is experienced as intense pain and intense fear that gets into panic and such severe depression and hopelessness that oftentimes the love addict thinks about killing themselves. Now, while they're in this state of withdrawal, because the addict is still out there in the wild blue yonder, they've got to do something to relieve their pain and their fear. What they start doing is they start obsessing. You know, one way to relieve feelings is to get up in your head, right? Everybody knows that. One way to relieve feelings is to get up in your head and start doing a lot of thinking. Obsession is about uncontrolled thinking. So the love addict goes into obsession. What do you think they obsess about? How to get him back. how to kill them, or kill who they're involved with. It's homicide, or you could even start to plan your own death, suicide. But anyway, they start obsessing, again, usually about how to kill themselves, how to kill somebody else, how they're going to go into their own addiction, like I'm going to drink again, and planning around all that, or they go into a major plan about how to get them back. Like, for example, maybe it is a love addict in a relationship with a sex addict, and they discover that their husband's in a motel room with their best friend. Their plan to get him back is like, I'm going to go down there, drive into the hotel, go in with a gun, point it at him, and say, get in the car. That's how I'm going to get him back. It could be any plan will do, as long as it takes you up in your head and you obsess forever about it. Then you implement the plan. That's called compulsion. To do all that. You obsess yourself into what you're going to do, then you do it. It's called obsession compulsion. It's an addictive process. Any of you ever done it to the point where you can't stop yourself? You just do it? I'll never forget when my sponsor said, Pia, stop thinking about him. I said, you're crazy. I spend my whole day thinking about him. I don't think about anything else. She got to stop thinking about him. Close your mouth and breathe. That was the first thing she told me. Anyway, so you go into this obsession and compulsion that relieves the withdrawal from the addict you're trying to be in a relationship with. So this relieves the withdrawal, the obsession and compulsion. And usually most of us who don't understand our trouble will really get into more planning than anything else about how to get them back in our life. And then we implement the plan, and it usually works. You usually get them turned back towards you. There's all kinds of things you can do. I could talk endlessly about how to get someone looking at you. And then what happens then for the love addict is they implement their plan in a compulsive way. It gets the addict turned to them, so then they really get relief momentarily, and then the addict, of course, gets overwhelmed by the neediness of the love addict. That's what I wanted to tell you. One of the problems for the love addict is they're codependent, so they don't know how to take care of their needs and wants very well. They don't know how to take care of getting food, clothing, shelter, especially women. They don't know how to get physical nurturing. They don't know how to get emotional nurturing from somebody, which is about asking for time, attention, and direction from somebody. They don't know how to, in an adult-like fashion, take care of their sexual needs. They don't know how to take care of their financial needs. They are dependent on other adults to do that for them. They're very, very needy, usually. If they're not, it's only because they're single. And when they get into a relationship, as I said before, all of a sudden this whole thing kicks in. And they're very, very needy. That neediness that gets worse and worse and worse as they get more and more addicted to somebody who's their higher power is extremely intense. And so, if nothing else is failing to drive the other person away, their intense and increasing neediness does. It's really funny because you can watch them therapeutically. You know, you can't treat these people. You can't treat a love addict as long as the person they're addicted to is facing them. The only time they're available for help is when that woman or man is walking away. Then they get into such pain that they're willing to do anything a therapist tells them to do to get out of the pain. You can almost track, without knowing anything about a couple, when the addict is in the love addict's life and when they're walking away, because they're in your office. When the addict is walking away and when they don't show up for their next appointment, you know the person is back in their life again. You just have to give up and wait for them to get abandoned again, and then they're available to work. But it is just awful. One of the things that I've had to do in the field in order to take care of myself, although I don't do very much therapy anymore, is follow Sheldon. I think it was Sheldon Kopp. I have such trouble with my memory. I'm probably quoting the wrong person. It was Sheldon Kopp said, whether a patient gets well or not is none of my business. Any therapist in this audience better have that kind of attitude when they're dealing with a love addict. Because if you don't, they'll kill you. Because of this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth thing. But anyway, what does recovery look like for the love addict? It's hard work. I remember I got so addicted to the person in my primary relationship with that I never thought I'd get out of it. The first thing I had to do is stop the compulsive behavior. And my compulsive behavior really was about creating intensity in the relationship, and any way I could do that would work. was enough to make it work, like screaming, having fits, and what I say, dropping bombs and responding to bombs. Any of you know about bombing your mate? Or responding to a bomb? Yeah. The first thing my friend Janet, who's my sponsor, said to me is, "You will stop bombing." That bothered me because I enjoyed it. It was part of creating the intensity. Now, how I would generally create the bomb is I would start obsessing about something that I knew he was doing. Whether he was doing or not was irrelevant. It's just that I decided up here in my sick way that he was doing that. And then I'd think about it to the point where I'd get myself hysterical. And the minute he would come home, I'd start into some crazy talking about whatever it is. He'd just start looking confused. But I was creating all kinds of intensity, and pretty soon a big fight was going. And then I'd have him facing me, and I'd get relieved. She said I had stopped doing that. She said, "Go ahead and obsess all you want, but close your mouth and breathe. You no longer can do that." I said, "Okay, I think I can do that, but I can't stop the obsession." Well, what happened was I did stop the bombing. Then I noticed I was getting bombed. Because what did we have? We had an addicted relationship. Somebody has to be dropping a bomb, don't they? Right. So I found out when I stopped dropping the bombs, I was getting bombed. It's like, I call it creating negative intimacy. Any intimacy will do, in order to feel like you have a relationship. Problem was, in these addictive relationships, all you know how to do is create negative intimacy, because usually that's all you've seen. So when I stopped dropping the bombs, I noticed I was getting bombed, and I could not stop responding to it. And I called her up, and I said, "What do I do?" She said, "Close your mouth and breathe again. Harder work. Harder work." I said, "I don't want to do that." She said, "You gotta." I said, "I don't think I can." She said, "Yeah, you can. Try it. Close your mouth and breathe. Don't bomb. Don't respond to the bombs." And guess what happened? It got very boring. And very quiet. It's like all of a sudden there was no relationship. Do you know what I mean? Have any of you ever tried it? Try it. If you haven't, you will be amazed. And then you'll go into panic. Because you'll think, I don't really have a relationship here. Well, you don't. Because all you've had up until this point is what I call negative intimacy. To create the fights. I keep getting close to telling you whatever that was, and it just gets right there and leaves again. Anyway, so the next thing she said is, once I got that kind of under control, and I wasn't bombing at all. Every now and then I'd get close to it, but I didn't do it, and I was stopping responding to all the other bombing. Then she said, "Now you got to work on your obsession." I said, "I can't." She said, "Yes, you've got to not only close your mouth and breathe, now you got to think about something else." That's when things really got quiet, and I got more frightened. And then once I did that, I started into that obsessional thinking, and I make myself think about something else. And it got so that I was thinking less and less about all that stuff that I used to think about that used to keep me all excited and upset and all that. And then she added one more thing to it. She said, "Start asking for what you need."
This is the end of Side 1. For more valuable information, turn cassette over now and continue to listen on Side 2. Do not fast forward.
Ever tried that with somebody who's hardly talking to you? It's fun. Ask for what you need and ask for what you want and notice what you get. I said, "I don't want to do that." She said, "Why, Pia?" I said, "Because I don't want to hear the no. I don't want to know how this is really working." She said, "You're keeping yourself in delusion, Pia. Ask." And I said, "I don't want to." She said, "Stop whining like a big baby and ask for what you want." So I started doing that, and then I couldn't track it. I didn't exactly know what was being said because I shut my ears off as I got the response. Because I was terrified I'd get those no's. So I went back to her. I said, "I'm asking for what I need and want, but I can't track what he's doing." She said, "Okay, now you got to do this. Ask for what you need and want, notice what you get, and celebrate the no." I said, "Celebrate the no? What do you mean? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard." She said, "You learn to celebrate the no and you'll break your addiction." I said, "All right, I'll try." So I cranked it up even tighter, and I started asking for what I needed and what I wanted and noticing what I was getting. And when I got a no, I would say to myself, thank you. I wouldn't say it to him, but I'd say to myself, this is what you're getting, Pia, and you can stand it. You got enough codependency recovery on board that you can stand hearing somebody say no to you in the interest of their self-care. So I started doing that. Guess what I found when I started doing that? It amazed me. I found that this is, and it was part of my addiction that this was happening. What I found out was that, and this my husband had complained about for years, I found out he was doing lots of things around my needing and wanting that I never noticed until she had me slow down, ask for what I needed, ask for what I wanted, and noticed what I was getting and celebrating the no. All of a sudden I began to see, as I was making myself track it, that he was providing for a lot of my needs and wants heretofore I had never observed, because what I was doing was, as a love addict and somebody who's been severely abandoned and neglected in my childhood, I was on hyper alert for any perceived abandonment. So the slightest no was huge to me, and I was never noticing the yeses. But in that process that my sponsor set up for me, all of a sudden I began to know what was really happening in this relationship. Now, I know what it was. I'll just tell you. Probably the biggest confrontation I ever got from the person I was addicted to was the night he told me that what I thought about this relationship I had with him was all fantasy. This is another thing you'll find with love addiction. That love addicts, because they get into a relationship with addicts, create a fantasy about the relationship from the get-go. You know how we do it. We meet somebody. Now, we're codependent and we really don't know who we are, but we figure out who we think they want us to be and we present that to them. All the time they're doing that to us. So immediately we get off on the wrong foot because we're not really telling the other person who we are, let alone most of us don't even know who we are in the first place, so it's really easy to tell somebody whatever we want them to think we are, which is always about what we think they want us to be. Then, you know, there's an addict out here you're trying to do that with. Don't forget that. And they're about those many abandonments all the time because they're addicts. Now, what the love addict does is start fantasizing about that not happening. They go into this enormous fantasy about who that other person is. So what happened to me when I got confronted about being in an addictive relationship and being a love addict is I got that right in my face. That the relationship that I thought was really wasn't. And I thought, you're just saying that so that you can justify all your behavior about abandoning me. But that wasn't true. What he said to me was the truth, and that was the worst experience of pain I have ever been through. And that was to open my eyes and go through the experience of finding out that what I thought was there was not there, that I had created a perfect fantasy so that I could stay in the relationship in the first place. Now let me tell you, that's when things get totally rough, if you know what I mean. Because not only do you find out that you're an addict and they're an addict, the other thing you find out is the relationship you thought was there is not there. And if you have a sponsor like mine, which said, close your mouth and breathe, ask for what you need, ask for what you want, notice what you get, and celebrate the no, then it's like a drunk. You know how when you get drunk and the drunk wears off and sobriety sets in? Well, it does too in these addictive relationships. Sobriety sets in and you take a look at that person and they take a good look at you. And it's very easy to turn on your heel and walk away. Say, screw this, I don't want this. But if you're really minding your P's and Q's and both of you are working at recovery, what you'll find out is you got to make a big decision. Am I going to stay in this long enough to find out who I am and who they are and them do the same? Am I going to stay in this long enough for us to recovery to find out who we are and whether we want to be in a relationship with one another? I would suggest you do that you take the time to do that and really find out who you are and who they are and then make an assessment about whether you belong in that relationship or not. If you don't, and you are a love addict or an addict in a relationship with another love addict or in an addictive relationship, you'll never resolve the issue. All you have to do is do that once, and you will, I believe, forever assess who you're looking at in terms of getting in a relationship again. You would never, ever put yourself through that one again. Now, for me, when I went into recovery and really started to see who I was in a relationship with, fortunately, what I was seeing, because I was forcing myself to face reality, was some real nice stuff. If it was just all bad, I'm sure it would have dove out of the relationship, but it wasn't. But more than that, I started to, this is about recovery again for the love addict, the only way I could celebrate the no was to get extremely active in my own self-care, so that the no didn't mean I wasn't going to get it. It means that I would have to ask somebody else or work extra hard to get it done myself. See, that took the compulsion out of trying to make him be there for me when he didn't want to be there for me. See that? So I coupled that with active self-care. Let me tell you what that was like. That was hard. That meant I had to start physically taking care of myself. It also meant I had to do the one thing that I didn't want to do, and that was go to a financial planner and sit and talk about money. I just did that today. It made me sweat, but I did. I went blow by blow by blow by blow and figuring out how much money I made, how I was going to invest it, how I was going to control it, how I was going to plan for my retirement. All this stuff that I just thrown over to the other person to take care of, I took control over and started taking care of that. And a bunch of other needs and wants I started to address, like recreational needs, friends' needs, all kinds of things that I had to get for me. I started becoming extremely active in getting for myself so that I could stand the no to you and the yes that he would give to somebody else. So what happened is I got into very, very powerful recovery from both my love addiction and my codependency at the same time. See, I don't see codependency as any kind of addiction. Codependency is about being a little person in a big body. Codependency is about a state of disease called immaturity, because you never had anybody help you grow up. It's not about addiction. Love addiction is what most people think of in terms of addiction when they call codependency an addiction. This is not an addiction. It's about being immature. Codependency. Love addiction is the part of that people mistake as an addiction in codependency. The other thing I would tell you is that you don't necessarily are addicted to somebody you're in a sexual relationship with. You can be love addicted to your own child. That's a bummer for them, because you hang on them and drain them in your neediness. Somebody doing this is somebody who enables a child to be sick, for example. You can be love addicted to your own parent, trying to make them be there for you when they're not going to be there for you. You can be love addicted to your therapist. You can be love addicted to your best friend. Anybody will do. As long as they pat you on the popo every now and then. And keep that chase going back and forth. So, to summarize this thing about love addiction recovery, it really requires you actively engaging in your own codependency recovery, and especially focusing on taking care of your needs and wants and truly interrupting this addictive process, confronting the pain and the fear. What I had to do was, when I was in this, and it was really hard because I'd wake up in a panic in the middle of the night and have to go out and get in my car and drive around. That's how bad it was. I got so suicidal that I considered going on some medication because I really thought I was going to do myself in. I knew I wouldn't because I have kids, and those of you who know me know I'd never do that, because I would never do that to my children. Not for me, but for them, which is sick. But anyway, that's who I am. And anyway, I stayed here, and I stayed in the pain and fear, and it made me confront the obsession and compulsion and start taking care of myself. And that's how you do it. It's a tough one. If you're a chronic love addict, what you're dealing with and what gets right on the line is your own life in terms of suicide. And sometimes you reverse it and you go out there and talk about killing them, killing the person who's in a relationship with whoever you're addicted to. Any of you identify with that? Homicide and suicide? Yeah, it does create intensity, doesn't it? Okay. Now, what I want to do is spend about 10 minutes answering questions about this. Okay? So does anybody have any questions they want to ask? I have to repeat the question. Y'all got it, huh? Yeah, you in the pink. They're the same thing. In the book Women Who Love Too Much, those gals are what I call love addicts. Yeah. Same thing, except that COSAs are love addicts who specialize in relationships with sex addicts. That's their gig, to get in a relationship with a sex addict. You know, sex addicts are very, very charming, be it male or female. They're power-filled, charming, seductive people. And they create the most intense relationships you can imagine. The trouble is, we mistake those relationships for love. Anyway, so it's very common to see a love addict who needs a lot of intensity. That's usually a love addict who's an addict in other ways too, such as myself. Choosing to be in relationships with sex addicts, because that's the most intense, exciting one of all. And the intensity removes you from reality. Let me tell you, that's part of the fantasy you create around the person you're in a relationship with and the nature of the relationship in the first place. So a COSA is somebody who is a love addict who specializes in relationships with sex addicts. Sick. I am one. So, been in it all my life. Yeah. Sponsorship? Okay, that's a hard one because most people don't know how to sponsor a love addict. I'll just tell you from a therapist standpoint. If you're going to sponsor somebody who's a love addict, I would take them through the same cycle mine took me through. How do you find somebody? It's a good question. You got to find somebody who's got sobriety from love addiction. Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous meetings mainly talk about sex addiction, not love addiction. But if you get somebody who's been hanging out in that meeting long enough, at least a year, they'll probably have some sort of sobriety from love addiction. But what you have to do is get somebody who will pace you through close your mouth and breathe, and don't set off any bombs. Then close your mouth and breathe, and don't respond to any bombs. Then what you're supposed to do is ask for what you need and want, close your mouth and breathe, ask for what you need and want, celebrate the nose, and notice what you get. That'll do it. That will do it. Take about 9 months. But it will work if you can keep the person you're sponsoring from killing themselves. If they get very suicidal, do not hesitate to send them to a good therapist. Good therapist. I have a wonderful therapist. I had to go to a therapist coupled with a powerful sponsor in order to do it for myself. And it didn't matter what kind of sobriety I had in codependency and alcoholism and a lot of other addictions I had. I needed two people with a black belt in both in what they knew how to do. One was a wonderful friend of mine I've had for years called Janet, and the other is Dr. Susan Maxwell, who's a psychologist here in town. She really helped me. And she's very funny, too. We'd sit and laugh, and she'd get me laughing about all this stuff I was so serious about. You know, you got to start seeing it funny. That's the good news. Once you start seeing how it's working, instead of being so grief-stricken, if you can start laughing about it and seeing the insanity of it all, you will get relief. So I just go in there, and Dr. Maxwell would, pretty soon we'd be laughing about it, and I get relief, and I go away and say, this isn't so bad. You can stand the pain of fear. You just have to do what all these people are telling you to do. Well, I want to tell you something. There's only one way to get sober. It doesn't matter what addiction you're dealing with, or there's only one way to grow up out of your codependency, and that's to do the footwork. You got to make a decision that you're going to get weller and proceed to follow the directions your sponsors and your therapists give you. If you're willing to do that, you can get out of this mess. I had spent 45 years in enough pain and fear, and I decided this old body was going to do whatever it had to do to get weller, because I wasn't going to stand that kind of pain and fear anymore. I was getting too old for it. I was just getting too old and have a heart condition, and that thing was kicking in, and I was feeling sick and miserable and sick and tired of being sick and tired of this particular addiction. And I have never felt better in my life in the last 3 months when I finally gotten real relief from this. It takes a sponsor who will kick you in your buttola. That's what it takes. And when you come in whining and screaming about how you're going to kill somebody or you're going to kill yourself, they sit you down and say that's not an option. And you're going to go back out there and do this. It's hard work. It is not for babies, and it is not for anybody who's not willing to do all that footwork for themselves. Yeah, I'll take one more question. This is the controller. This is the pleaser. But this pleaser over here is really not... Let's define it differently. The controller is the person who says, sit down and shut up. The pleaser is really a manipulator who gets people to sit down and shut up without telling them how it happened, which drives this person insane. which drives the addict insane. See, the addict is a controller. Sit down, shut up, and do what I say. That's this person over here. This love addict over here is the one that manipulates somebody into sitting down and shutting up, which drives the other addict crazy. That also helps to stir it all up and create intensity, which everybody's after, because nobody wants to face reality of who you are and who they are, and act like an adult. See, recovery from codependency in any of these addictions is about facing reality. Addictions are there just to remove reality. Because as a codependent, you're too immature to face reality, because you know that if you faced it, you have to do something about it, and you don't know what to do because you're too big of a baby. That's what it's all about, folks. The only way out of this one is to sit down, shut up, take direction, and grow up. And stop blaming the other person for how miserable you are. That's another thing I'd say that goes in there. You have to stop the big bony finger, and you have to start blaming everybody else for how awful you feel. That was one of the worst things I ever had to do, because I was an expert. I had a black belt in blaming Pat. If you'd just shape up and do what I tell you to do, I'd be happy. Now that's delusion. Because you're the only one that can make you happy. And nobody's going to love you as you're trying to tell them what to do so you can be happy. Besides that, that's controlling the addict's reality, and they hate that because they fear engulfment and intimacy. Now, for my friend, Fiddle, I can't think of her name. I take a medication that I can't remember stuff, and it's terrible when you're a public speaker. But anyway, I got in this huge conference. There was 1,000 people in this room, all looking at me. Shocked me, because I was only supposed to speak to 100, and 1,000 people showed up. And I was facing them all, and I forgot the topic. And I kept getting in the middle of the thing and forgetting what I said. And I have to say to all these people, where was I? And they just repeat it back. You were right here, Pia. And I go, okay, now wait a minute. Let me think about it. Then I'd start up again, because this medication, it makes it hard for me to track. But anyway, I get up and do it anyway. I believe in being perfectly imperfect.